Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor and your host.
To kick off Rare Disease Month, we have a powerhouse advocate in the rare disease community joining us, Grossman. She is the co-founder of ADCY5.org. She has spent over 15 years championing the importance of genetic testing, data sharing, and patient empowerment. Her journey began when her adult daughter, now Lilly, was undiagnosed for 15 years before being identified as the first known patient with full body ADCY5 related movement disorder. Since then, Gay has built a community globally for this rare condition, connecting families and researchers in ways that have directly led to symptom management and new treatments. And what was really interesting, I found about Gay as we started getting to know each other, that her experience as a parent of a child, now an adult, with a rare disease actually led to a complete career change. And she now works for GeneDx, that a lot of people know as this great genetic testing company. But most of our conversation is going to be on the before. But we're going to talk about that too as we get into our conversation. So, Gay, thank you so much for coming on and celebrating Rare Disease Month with me.
Thank you. It's really great to be able to raise awareness with you and the rest of the rare disease community.
Yeah, definitely. So, why don't we kick it off by learning a little bit more about you and Lily's journey of figuring out what condition she had? Because, as I mentioned for listeners, for 15 years, she was undiagnosed. So, can you give us a little bit, especially your experience as the parent, of just navigating those years and the obstacles that you both faced?
Well, you can imagine it was really challenging. It was at a time where we didn't have the tools that we have today. So we are in a completely different space now with genetic testing. But when Lily was born, she had, normal delivery. She was a normal baby. Everything was typical. And she really didn't have challenges that were obvious until she was 6 to 8 months old. And actually, the first time I have it recorded on paper, I asked about it at an 8 month. So it was a very long time of going around from doctor to doctor, from hospital to hospital. We traveled all over the country. Yeah. This is really before the internet was a resource. And so
Because this is like mid 90s for people, like reference wise.
This is late 90s. She was born in 97. And, we had great healthcare in Cleveland. We had the Cleveland Clinic. We had Rainbow Babies. We had a lot of resources there, but we really got to the end of our resources. But as things changed, new tests would come about. And like every 4 to 5 years, we would find that we would go back to another institution to do more tests. And, we really did a lot of invasive tests too. Like we were doing, big things like nerve biopsies, muscle biopsies, many skin biopsies, just because things would change. It was really challenging, and as a mom, you're trying to do everything you can to help your child, and to see them so uncomfortable because this disorder is a movement disorder and it's really painful what she went through every night of her life. And so to be able to stop that was really all we wanted. We wanted to be able to get her help, and it was really frustrating. And we really felt like we fell through the cracks because we were really driving the process. And I think that unfortunately has not changed. I think families are still driving the process. And, it's frustrating for people, but that's why I changed careers, because I don't want someone to go through what we did as a family.
Which is so admirable to say this was your experience and you want to change that for other parents that are going through exactly what you went through of this specific disorder, but also other movement related disorders, other rare diseases, and just the impact that you can have working at a genetics company is just you can't measure it. And so for people to understand a little bit better, what were some of the symptoms that Lily was having? Like, what was that first symptom that you noticed when she was only months old? And how did that progress in those early years?
So in the very beginning, she was very weak, like through her trunk. And she was my first child, so I did not have anything to compare it to other than I babysat a lot when I was growing up. And so, when you pick up a baby and you throw them on your hip, when they get to be that size that you're not cradling them in your arms, you don't expect to have to kind of hold their neck and their head, and you don't expect for their torso to be more floppy. And that's exactly what was happening. And and to do things like not see her pull up in her crib or, try to get up on her hands and knees and her arms would literally collapse. And so anytime we were playing, we had to make sure that, we weren't playing on a wooden floor or something, because she always had these, bruises on her forehead from losing control with her arms. That was, really where it started. We did not see the first movement until she was 16 months old.
The first involuntary movement, you mean?
Yeah, it was the first time we had seen that. It was the day before we had our first neurology appointment. And luckily, my husband was sitting next to me and saw it. She was reaching for a toy, and as she did it, she kind of had this little jerk motion from her neck out to her arm, and her head moved a little bit. And, I looked at him and I said, "Did you see that?" And that was really the first. And before that, it was more developmental delay. And by that time, we had already had 2 pediatricians. And the only way that I got to this neurologist was because I had a dear friend who's a physical therapist, and I took my daughter to her house. And I remember this like it was yesterday. Her daughter at 9 months old, wearing socks, was running around, jumping across different board books that are slippery. And Lily was sitting on my lap at 16 months. And I thought, holy cow. And I had done everything that I could as a parent and that I should have done as a parent, but I still felt like I had lost so much time. And one of the things, Kira, is so many families that I talk to daily now, they go through the same thing that I did, the same odyssey that I did, even though it's a different gene that's affected. If you hear the stories of families who are going through, like a neurological disorder, a lot of times it starts like my story does. And, I like to say that I went on an odyssey, not a journey, because if you actually look up those words, a journey is a very planned adventure, whereas an odyssey is an unknown start to finish and has a lot of circular direction in it. And that's exactly what we experienced as a family. So it started with that, but then it progressed as she got older. And the really strong movement started when she was about 4. And it started in her legs, and then it slowly crawled up her body so that it consumed her entire body by the time she was in middle school.
And that must have just been so torturous as a parent to see your child going through this, and you're trying everything you can and going to all the appointments, and you're checking off every box you possibly could and being the best parent you can. And you're like, I still can't figure this out. I can't imagine that. I'm not a parent myself yet. I'm actually similar age to your daughter now. But just the turmoil of trying to figure that out, especially with your husband and looking at each other. And, I've heard from other people, like you said, a lot of rare disease parents go through a very similar process where those developmental milestones are not being met at the time we expect them to be. And they see a kid that is younger doing something that their kid isn't doing yet. And that's something that I've heard, and we've heard on the podcast. We've had the privilege of interviewing probably over 100 parents of kids with rare diseases at this point. And that is something that so many of people say. And it's also heartbreaking that, this was 27, 28 years ago, but a lot of people are still experiencing the same thing. How can we almost 3 decades later have the same problems when so much in medicine and especially genetics has moved forward? That aspect also must be so frustrating for you to see today.
It's so frustrating. And, I had the luxury of one child that I was focusing on. I had the fortunate situation of being in a household where my husband was supporting us financially, that I had the time to devote to this. I am ultra organized. I mean, I had a binder of hers that was tabbed and dated, and I had duplicated it multiple times, and I would share it. And I would share it before appointments so that I could make sure that our time was used wisely. And I was managing it like a project manager. And there were times where I would go and they would say, oh, you should see this person at this institution. And we would go and we would, get the same results, which was nothing. And we would do the battery of tests. But I will never forget the day that I was sitting in my car. And this was probably 2 years before she was diagnosed. And I had just sent our folder to someone else who had been recommended to me. And he was the first person who said to me, wow, it's so impressive what you sent to me. And I've never said to someone before, I don't have any suggestions for you. You have seen every single person that I would recommend across the country. My thought is how can you possibly say that? Like, how can you possibly say that we are at the end? And we were at the end. We had done everything. And families that are still doing that, it's so devastating that they're having to go through this time. And these, it's obviously getting much shorter. Like with adcy5.org, we are finding families very quickly. Social media is magic, right? The family gets their genetic test report. After meeting with their genetic counselor or clinician, they are going back home to their laptop and they are putting the name of those genes in. And we have worked really hard to make sure that we are on the first page. So we hear from them within hours, and we've heard from them within hours, for a really long time since we started the organization. But we didn't have that, right? I mean, Lilly was the first. So it's very unfortunate that families are going through this, but they are getting to help faster because a lot of these organizations have been started and they're run by really knowledgeable parents because they're really taking the lead on all of this. But the fact that they don't know where to go when their clinician has told them, let's just wait a little bit. Families, I remind people all the time that families who are having babies are young people. These are not people who are experienced going through the medical system or the insurance system or the educational system. And each one of those is such a large project for a young person who is, like you pointed out, your age, not much older than you are, if even your age. And they are trying to manage all of these things while sometimes caring for multiple children, often multiple children. And it's really challenging for them to go to a person of authority that they see their clinician. They do not want to make waves. So if something's recommended to them, they may not question it until months later. And the challenge that we have in our country is it takes so long to get into a doctor and a specialist. Sometimes that can be 6 to 9 months or longer. And so time is just evaporating. And even back almost 30 years ago, I remember saying to the geneticist when I took Lilly to the first geneticist, and there was no sense of emergency at all. It was just everything was so slow. Like, well, we've taken these labs and we're going to wait. And, I knew exactly when the labs were supposed to get back. And they were not back. And more than 2 weeks had passed. And I was getting, I would say, this is when I like to say sometimes I'm not assertive. I get a little aggressive. And especially when it comes to things like that. You do, unfortunately. And so I give families, kind of gentle ways that they can work the system. One of the things that I suggest to them is, you don't have to fire your doctor. It doesn't have to be something that's really, a negative experience. You just add another specialty to your team, or you add someone else. Like, it's great that we have genetic counselors that we didn't have when Lilly was, a baby. And there are more ways to get some kind of answers or contact. And you don't just have to wait for that one doctor. You can add someone to your team. So I encourage families to do that. But it's still happening. And it's so frustrating to me because so much has changed, but so much is staying the same.
It is. And how helpful for families that are getting that diagnosis that sometimes I imagine even in the car on the way home from that appointment, they're typing it into Google. They're typing in ADCY5 and your organization comes up that is completely volunteer run, I've learned.
Yes.
And to have all of these resources and so much of what you experienced as a parent and figuring this out and learning all these different avenues that you have, learning who are the providers that can be helpful. How do you navigate the educational system? How is insurance going to cover certain aspects? All of these really hard questions that these are systems that are not easy to navigate. I struggle navigating the insurance system and I'm a healthcare provider. If anyone should have an easier time doing it, it should be me, right? I still struggle in my own life. Can we get this prescription covered, please? There's a reason for it. And that's just for little nominal things. So This is just so helpful for people to have as a resource, and that you've put so much of your own time and effort into this so that everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, and they can take a page out of your playbook and say, hey, I can use this. But you didn't have that because Lilly was the first person diagnosed with the full body version of this. Am I getting that right in terms of her diagnosis?
Yeah, there was one family ahead of us that had a facial twitch. And so the disorder was called ADCY5 related facial dyskinesia. So ADCY5 facial dyskinesia. When Lilly was diagnosed, they changed the name of the disorder to ADCY5 related dyskinesia.
Because of Lilly, they changed the name.
Because of Lilly, right. And because the way to really define the difference between someone who has a movement disorder that perhaps could not be diagnosed on an EEG because it's not seizures, it's the movements at night. So if one of our lead researchers says, if you have a patient that has movements during the day and at night, and these movements wake them up at night, test for ADC.
Wow, which obviously was not something that was in any kind of protocols or workflows because back in the day.
And actually, nighttime is actually worse.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So we used to go to doctor's appointments, and you know how you see the 10 faces on the wall, and it says, how are you feeling, right? And so at this time, speech was very challenging for Lilly. So they would often show that to Lilly, and they'd say, where on the scale are you today, Lilly? How do you feel? And she would look at me and kind of roll her eyes because, she's cognitively typical. So she knows what's going on, even when she's having these horrible movements that are like, they look like a grand mal seizure. We've actually shown people a video of it, and they can't even watch the full thing. It's really, really upsetting. And Lilly would kind of roll her eyes at me, and she'd be like, well, I'm an 8 now, but tonight I won't be. And last night I wasn't. Because you don't actually see the disorder the way it is at your home. When you're sitting in an exam room, it looks completely different. And actually during COVID, and this is pretty recently, her neurologist had been seeing her since she was 8 years old when we moved to California. And it was the first time that she'd actually seen Lilly, even though on video, in her home. And she said it was a completely different experience seeing Lilly like that rather than in an exam room, because in an exam room, we have to travel to the hospital. We have to go from the parking garage into the hospital. We have to wait who knows how long, right, to be able to get and then you wait in the exam room. So it's a really long process. And to put a child like that with, she already has an energy deficiency through hours to get to the end game of seeing the doctor, she's going to look differently than she does sitting at our kitchen table with a laptop in front of her.
How can you not?
So, yeah, totally different. So it was interesting because I didn't even notice it. The neurologist did. She said, it's really interesting seeing Lilly at home rather than my office. And so I explained that to her. I said, it's a trek to get to you. Even though your office is 20 minutes from our house, it's hard.
It's so involved, and wait times can be terrible in a lot of healthcare. And I think with that, talking about the sleep disturbances. So with these involuntary movements, which there's so many within that umbrella, would that often then she would be sleeping and maybe still does wake her up, and then she can't get back to sleep. And so just constantly low energy, because if you never get a good night of sleep, it's almost like people that have a newborn. You're going to be tired because you're not getting a full night of sleep. Would you say that that's an accurate statement or close to?
I actually think having a newborn is easier. And I can say that because
that's saying a lot.
With our newborn, we got up and we fed her at 4:00 in the morning, or maybe she was eating twice a night, at the new stage, but then she goes back to sleep, right? You feed them, you change them, you put them in bed. That's not how this was. This could be every 5 minutes. And it was nonstop. And the challenge also was that there's anxiety that comes with it if you know this is going to happen again. So you don't really want to go to sleep. And so a lot of times Lilly would get up at 4 and we would be up at 4. And actually, you have to make light of it, because you can't just I always wanted to put on a strong face in front of her. And I always wanted it to be like, I'm here and we're together. And we still joke about this because if she wakes up and she, calls me for a glass of water, she doesn't live at home anymore. But if she's home visiting and she says, "Can I have a glass of water?" and I take it to her, she'll say, "Mom, it's our special time." And it'll
Aww.
be 4 a.m. So, we joke about it. But of course, back then we weren't. But we watched a lot of HGTV and we watched a lot of The Sound of Music. And that
because
was
as a
one of my
kid, that was
favorites.
before the streaming days. So you couldn't just put on a really good show. It was whatever was playing. Although Sound of Music is
No.
amazing. So
Well, so Sound of Music was my favorite because you take the Sound of Music VHS to the hospital, that gives you a good long movie.
yeah.
And you can
You've
listen
got,
to that
3
over and
hours?
over again. It's long. And so I would not have to get up and get on a stool because the VHS was hanging from the ceiling and change the tape out. I could actually relax for a little bit. So yeah, we spent a lot of time a week together.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to describe what that's like. She does sleep now because we were able to find a treatment for that. But
I was going to ask about
times that it comes back, and my husband and I will say to each other, "We are way too old for this."
Right.
The families who are not sleeping, it is a significant challenge. It's so important that people understand the importance of that. So many times I've seen, even in our own community, where they've wanted to do a natural history study. And the first thing they think about is, well, how can we get the kids to walk? How can we get them out of their wheelchairs? And the families are saying, how can you let us sleep?
That seems to be the number one thing. There was an interview that we did, I'm looking it up as I say this, with Scotty Taylor, episode 293, we'll put it in the show notes, that her daughter has Smith-Magenis syndrome. And sleep disturbance is, out of all the different symptoms, as an outsider, I wouldn't think of that immediately. Looking at the different symptoms, oh, that must be the one that, if you could take one off a list, parents would say that one. But as we got into the interview and learned, I'm like, of course, if you're not sleeping, how can you do anything? How can anything be enjoyable if you have such low energy? I mean, how can you get through? And that interview really opened my eyes up to any condition that has sleep disturbance as part of it. That's the one that parents and people with that condition are most focused on. Because, I mean, that's
It
how
affects
people in other
everything.
countries are even tortured. If people are not sleeping,
Right.
that's a form of torture. I can't even imagine not being able to sleep. And then the meta anxiety of, well, I don't want to go to sleep because then I'm going to start having these experiences, and it just absolutely horrible.
It is. But thankfully, we have moved past that.
Yeah. So some of the treatments that Lilly has been on has helped with that, as well as some other aspects of the disorder.
Yes. And, I'd really like to share that it was the patient community that came together to bring this to the attention of the researchers. And it's the researchers who listened and engaged with the community. And, working together, we were not only able to prove this, because we proved the compound in mice. I shouldn't say we, the researchers did, but
you're part of it. Yep.
We definitely were part of the conversation. And then the follow-up is that we've been involved in the research studies after, and we just did one. We just did a brain imaging study, and the researchers can't call the patients to get them into the study. So that's what we do as a nonprofit. So we have our list, and the researchers tell us what kind of patients they're looking for, and they were looking for a certain age group. And it was really up to us as the patient advocacy organization to help our community understand what this research would show, what would be expected of them, and what we would get out of it as a community. So a lot of that is put on the patient advocacy organization. We spent many Saturdays having conversations with the families, and this was traveling internationally. So, we worked really closely with the researchers to say, I need some kind of handout, have a conversation, but they need to be able to explain it to the other parent. They need to probably be able to explain it to their own parents who are going to come into their home to take care of the other children while they're traveling. We're going to need to explain it, to their schools that they're going to be out of the school for a week and why. And, you just need to be able to help the families with the conversation, because if you just say to them, we're doing this brain imaging study, well, if you tell them what we're going to get out of it as a community, they'll be much more inclined to be involved in it. So it was a lot of teamwork between the research team and us. And then, any papers that are written, we have a very close relationship with our researchers. So they share those with us even before they're published, because they know that they want to have it under, so that it's something that we can identify with, because it's something that we've put a lot of time into. Even if we're
Yeah.
just showing up, they wouldn't have the data if they didn't have us showing up.
No, it's so important to have that relationship, clinical trials, research, natural history studies, all of this, to have these companies that are doing it, these organizations, pharmaceutical companies, to have a relationship with the patient community, often through an organization like yours, where it's a hub and it's a trusted community that parents and people with this disorder trust you and your organization. Because if someone comes to you and says, hey, we want to do this study, and you meet with them and you're like, no, you're kind of just taking advantage of us. Like, what are we going to get out of this as a community? Like, you're going to filter that for them and then reach out. And that relationship is, I think, overall so undervalued in the genetics world. And we really need to put a lot more value in that, in time, in developing these relationships with the organizations that are often like yours, parent-led and founded.
We get contacted by researchers because they're interested in doing, they're interested in doing research in a certain area, and they want a letter of support from us as the patient advocacy organization. And we had someone come to us that we didn't know was doing research, and we said, we'd like to sit down with you and learn about what you want to do. Well, we had already done that, so we didn't want them applying for a grant that was for work that's already been completed, but they don't know about it because it's not published.
So that's a catch-22 for you. Yeah.
We were able to put those two researchers together. And luckily, we have collaborative people we're working with. And they were able to discuss and say, this is what we've done. Here's the next step. Let's have the grant be for the next step.
Wow.
Rather
so
than
even
doing the
just
same thing over
expediting
again.
and not having people working on the same thing, like let's be efficient with this.
Right. Patient advocacy organizations are the only stakeholder in the drug development process that can contact patients directly.
Yeah. I mean,
So it's really important that those who are developing potential treatments work with the patient advocacy organization, because not only can they help educate the community prior to that clinical trial, they can engage them and encourage them. You can't do that. That's coercing if you are industry. But if you are a patient advocate, you can talk to the family and explain to them the importance, and then let them make their own decision. But at least you can say that you're going to spend the time with them and answer questions and say, this is the benefit. And if it's not a benefit to that family, they don't need, they can make the choice, but at least they have all the information and it's parent to parent.
Yeah, that dynamic is so different because you're going to be looking out for them as a parent and knowing what their thoughts are going to be and questions. And so, I mean,
and we
it's
can
like
make
that's
suggestions about what to ask their clinician, because they should be a part of the conversation too. But sometimes they don't even know what to ask.
Yeah. So with all this experience, we mentioned at the top that you do work for GeneDx, and, this interview is not sponsored by them or anything. I just thought it was interesting to ask you about. So what led to not just a career pivot, a career change? All this experience, how were you like, yeah, I'm going to completely change my career now?
Well, so when Lilly was going away to school, I decided that, I kept thinking, like, what am I going to do when she goes away? I was self-employed while she was home because I could really rearrange my day around her schedule. And, I thought, gosh, I have 20 years of knowledge in my head, and there's got to be some company that needs to understand how to work with families, because I kept seeing the disconnect. And it was through my own community that I would see this. I would see how they would want to do a natural history study, like I said, and they'd want to get them out of wheelchairs instead of actually have them sleep. And I just thought there's just this big lack of communication. And so I just started talking to people and networking and just saying, you know what I've done, where we've started. We didn't actually have the compound for Lilly until she was out of college. So this was even before that. But I was able to network and meet people and find a place where I could work directly with families. It was interesting. I thought that I would spend a majority of my time teaching the biotech about the families and what the families wanted, but I ended up spending a lot of time talking about the families and what a biotech is doing. And, the fact that, you just can't share timelines when you're developing treatments like this. And timelines are, they move all the time. And the protection of that is not just to say we can't share it with you, it's that it moves. And we are really sensitive to the fact that things change and science is not black and white. And new experiments need to be done. And a lot of, families are in a very challenging position because time is like sand falling through the sieve. Lily lost years of experiences because of not having a treatment when she was a child. But, she is the beautiful person she is because of her experiences. And I wouldn't say she's lost anything. I would say that she actually is really strong because of it.
Yeah. And both can be true. It can be true that she gained so much of experience and just learning in life through this, but also that there were things that maybe she could have been able to do that she didn't because she didn't have a treatment at that time. And it's like you say career change, but in a lot of ways, what you were doing for 20 plus years, you were building a career in that and all the skills you were developing, starting the organization, all this work you've been doing in advocacy with other families. And you're like, oh, I could transfer all of these skills and honestly doing a lot of what you were already doing, but just under the scope of a genetic testing company and having even bigger of an impact by working for such a big, awesome company. So it actually kind of the way that now we talk about it, it's like, oh, actually, that's a pretty natural next step. So in terms of all the experience you had, and there's so many other parents in your situation that start an organization, developed all of these skills, know all these resources, know the networking aspect of who you have to talk to get certain things done. And it's like, those are the people that we need, like you, Gay, in these roles to be able to make this happen. And I've seen more and more, I would say in the last, I don't know, I'll put something random on it, like last 12 to 18 months of job postings for patient advocate, and they're looking for people like you. And that gives me so much hope that pharmaceutical companies, genetic testing companies, other organizations are realizing how useful people with your skill set are in these roles and how much can happen with them involved. And it's given me a lot of hope that I'm seeing a lot more of these job advertisements. 2 years ago, I don't remember seeing one job advertisement for that. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right places, but I just get so curious. I'm not looking to get hired in that. I don't have those skills, but I just like seeing what's out there. And it's great that we have these titles now.
I think the companies are starting to realize when you have a family that you are trying to get information to, why would you not get information from that family of how to direct your message? I mean, some things just don't make sense if you read them from an agency or someone who is hired to do a job. And I don't know, an analogy on it, but like if you're trying to get consulting on something, don't you hire someone who's been in the trenches of that industry? And
right.
Being a caregiver is that industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. So it's great that we've seen this expansion, I think, and just how
Yeah.
much we need patient voices and caregiver voices in advocacy and part of just the normal workflow and the normal workforce too with that.
Right. Right. Well, I think that families who are in the trenches and taking care of a child and have something to share with companies like GeneDx. Like, we want to work with families. I am always, every day, I'm talking to families because we want to hear from them. And the way that we work with families is by hearing what their needs are and what their wants are. And patient advocacy organizations have needs and they want to be able to communicate genetic testing to their community. And how can we do that as a company? Who better to learn for than people who have been there?
Yeah.
So it's a great opportunity for me. And I feel like it makes it all worth it. It makes the decades of challenging nights, it's like a payback for me that I'm able to help the families. I mean, I remember so clearly what those nights were like. And anytime I can rescue someone from that, that's a win for me. I want to be able to help people. I want people to find answers. I want them to be able to start on that path of either finding a community or finding the researchers that are studying. It's, that's what gives you hope at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you've been able to do that for so many people already. And all the people that you're going to help. I mean, it just, your impact has been massive. And to come full circle, we started the episode saying that we're kicking off Rare Disease Month. This is the first episode of February for us. And I wanted to give a shout out to the event you're doing in, I think, downtown San Diego for Rare Disease Day. So tell me more about the event and where people can check out more info.
We're really excited to have the whole community in San Diego come together. It's limited tickets, but you can get out more information at sdrarediseaseday.org. We are partnering, adcy5.org is partnering with Once Upon a Gene. So Effie Parks.
Effie Parks, friend of the show. Exactly. Love it.
Yep, she and her daughter are coming into San Diego for that weekend, actually, and we'll have the event down at the Brigantine Pier, downtown San Diego. And then after we have the event, we'll be going across the street to take a group picture in front of the county administrative buildings. And it will be illuminated in rare disease lights, as it has. I've been having that lit up through our congressman's office for years. So I'm plugged to my local congressman for doing that for us. And we also work with Jane Main is the event planner who has volunteered her time, and she owns Contenta meetings and events, and she's been super supportive of us and just helping us organize, the ticket sales and helping us get sponsors. So yeah, please go to the website and check out the sponsors, because we've gotten some great companies to back this effort.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll put a link in those show notes for that and the episode that Effie Parks did on DNA Today. I was on her show as well, so I guess I'll throw that in there. Lots of links for this episode. But Effie is just awesome. We have not been able to meet in person yet, but it will happen. And you got to listen to the end of her episodes, because she includes this heartwarming moment, at least in the episodes I've listened to. It's probably every episode, I imagine.
It's in all of them.
Every episode. Good. I like that I have a fellow fan here to fact check me, of Ford laughing. And it's so cute. That's her kiddo who has a rare disorder. And for people that have followed me for a while, Ford was actually featured in this portraits of, I think it was all kids with rare diseases, and his face was in Times Square for February. So I went down and took a picture with it to send to Effie, because she's not New York based. So yeah, very cool. So there's always something awesome going on for Rare Disease Month. So we'll have lots of links in the show notes for everybody to check it out and find an event close to you. Gay, thank February you so much. Yes, February 28th. That's the big day. And fun fact, whenever it's a leap year, it's the 29th. So
yes, that was last year.
Yeah, so the rarest day of the year, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Gay. This was just such a great experience of learning about what you've gone through and really the silver linings that you've been able to take from it and helping other people and really paying it forward in other families. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and teach our audience.
Well, thank you, Kira. It was great to speak with you, and thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.